confirm that the worst parts, the best parts, this is the best of the rest.
Hello, and God's gonna sit this one out. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received upon release and only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's sometimes a challenge, but always a good time. And this week, we are talking The Punisher. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the man who was armed to the teeth with comic book knowledge, Andrew Williams. Are you ready for this one, Andrew?
I am.
Man, a few words. I like it. Perfect for a podcast. That
Broadcast school really paid off.
Yeah. What's your history with this movie? Did you see it in theaters? Have you watched it a lot over the years?
I feel like, what was this rated? Was it rated R?
This is rated R.
But I probably didn't see it in theaters because when this came out, maybe I would have been almost 17 when this came out. So maybe I did, but I do remember like owning it on DVD. I do remember watching it. I'm pretty sure this is another one my mom really likes. But yeah, I definitely have watched this a lot in the years that came after it. Hadn't watched it recently very much, but yeah, I remember like having it on DVD, watching it a lot, and definitely rewatching it. I remember a lot of this movie. So more in my brain than I may have realized.
Yeah, I don't think I saw it in theaters, but I did see it back in the day, 04, maybe 05 when it came to DVD or whatever at the time. And I liked it enough. I do remember this was actually the first time my dad bought me a poster for this movie. And it was the first time I ever had a legit movie poster that's two-sided in the full 27 by 34 or whatever they are.
40.
Sure. Huge poster on my wall. And I wasn't like a huge fan of the movie, but I loved that poster. It was pretty cool. And I didn't really watch it much over the years. I know that it doesn't have the best reception, especially critically. As far as audiences or the internet, I feel like it's mostly kind of just forgotten. Definitely people saw it back in the day or at some point, and no one really talks about that great Punisher movie we got or that awful one that was silly. There's been a few reboots since then, and those get talked about a little bit more. The only thing I really ever hear about this movie is that I think people like Thomas Jane as the Punisher.
Yeah, that seems to be that's the big one. I think there was a genuine like of him as the Punisher. Obviously, I think Jane came to really like the character, really wanted to continue with it. Obviously, that didn't come to pass for a variety of reasons. But yeah, it's odd because watching it back, I was kind of like, I don't get it. I don't really get what the issue is, really.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna jump into it.
Yeah, we'll jump into it more, but
all the positives, all the things that we like. But yeah, definitely up front, I will say I enjoyed watching this movie.
Yeah, it was a good time. I will speak more about it, but overall, I really didn't understand it. I know I have friends that are like huge Punisher fans that really liked this movie. Obviously, it makes its own modifications for screen, but overall, it was certainly a kinder reception, I think, than Punisher Warzone that came a few years later. But yeah, overall, I feel like Forgotten About is kind of the best summation of this movie. It just kind of came and then it just kind of went.
Released April 16th of 2004. This movie had a budget of $33 million. At the box office, brings in $54.7 million. Technically profitable, but not a smash hit. Considering it was an R-rated movie, I don't think the expectations were much higher than what it actually brought in. Critically, like we mentioned, not well received. Just a 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. That is pretty low. The audience score is a bit higher, but as we mentioned, people aren't really talking about the movie that much. This movie was written and directed by Jonathan Hansley. This is actually his directorial debut. He is most known as a screenwriter. He wrote Die Hard with a Vengeance. Andrew, everybody who's written a Die Hard movie comes up on this podcast.
Everybody. You, no matter what, we will eventually run into everybody who wrote every Die Hard.
He also wrote the original Jumanji, The Saint, starring the greatest actor of all time, Val Kilmer, and Armageddon. So definitely some big hits in there, definitely well known in the industry, and he gets the keys to the director's chair in this one. Now, there's also a writing credit we should mention by Michael France. We've talked about Michael France before because he was also a writer on Hulk in the 2005 Fantastic Four, as well as Cliffhanger in Goldeneye. No longer with us, rest in peace, Michael France, but primarily written and, of course, directed by Jonathan Hemsley.
Yeah. An interesting choice. Like I said, he was had never really directed before, had been working in the industry for over a decade at that point. So he'd obviously made some ins and some outs. And I think for the style of movie they were going for, the kind of scripts he wrote, I'm guessing that all lined up. Maybe I have no idea. Maybe he was the cheapest. But yeah, he gets handed another writer-director combo, much like our boy Mark Steven Johnson.
Yeah, that's right. And this movie had some hurdles, some challenges to overcome. It was definitely a pretty small budget, 33 million, which apparently got reduced a few times before production actually started. And they shot this movie in just 52 days. So a pretty tall order considering it was his first time directing. We've already kind of mentioned we kind of like this movie. I think it's pretty impressive when you consider all the circumstances that he was working under.
No, I agree. It's something that when you really see all those limitations, it actually becomes a little bit more impressive because you hear about some of the other things he was intending to do. He was obviously going to dive a little bit more into like his war background, things like that. But all that ended up on not even the cutting room floor, but the
draft room floor, the writing room floor,
the recycling bin, the backspace key. I don't know, but yeah, some of that. So a lot of that stuff fell by the wayside, which are all fairly integral parts of the character. But I think the way they end up streamlining it, it gets the point across. I don't mean this in a bad way, but it feels like a very small production. Like we're keeping things pretty condensed. We got a couple of more lavish sets, but overall we're keeping it pretty gritty, not in like a sense of tone, but just in the sense of like the filmmaking process. So I think it works generally for this version of the Punisher and the way they're going for it. But yeah, I can't imagine being the director in that situation was fun at all.
Yeah, and I think, the final runtime is just over 2 hours, which can be hard to justify sometimes. If you're going to keep me in a comic book movie for over 2 hours, there better be some good content in there. And I think it pulls it off. I don't think more scenes would have helped this movie. I also read a bit about how some things were changed on the special effects side to be a little bit more practical and money efficient because of that. And again, I think all that works to the movie's favor.
It definitely does. I think there's only a couple of things that they feel like they really use CGI for. And honestly, I think there's some of the worst looking stuff in the movie. Hashtag positivity podcast. But I think going practical for everything else, like you said, it helps the feel, it helps the tone, makes it just feel more like this is a personal vendetta instead of just kind of an action fest, which is fine. But for this story, I think it works to its advantage.
Well, let's talk about the story that does make it onto the screen. FBI agent Frank Castle retires from active duty and looks forward to spending more time with his wife and son. While at a family reunion in Puerto Rico, his entire family is murdered at the order of Howard Saint, a mob boss whose son Bobby was killed during Frank's last mission. Castle is the only survivor of the massacre and returns to his home city seeking revenge on Howard and his organization. When the mob learns Frank is alive, they send every assassin they have to kill him, but all are unsuccessful. Frank Castle adopts the moniker of the Punisher and carries out his mission. First things first, Andrew, let's jump into the cast of this movie. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to start at the top, at the high point, at the best casting and best performance of the film. We like to recognize one person that goes above and beyond the call of duty and elevates the quality of the entire movie with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, I'll throw it to you. Who gets the Mark Strong Award for The Punisher?
This is one I had to think about for a while, but in what might be seen as an odd choice, I'm giving it to John Travolta as Howard Saint.
Really? I
Yes.
am floored right now, Andrew, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. I think that is an odd choice, but tell me, why does it go to John Travolta?
I don't know. Like once we get into the Punisher stuff, I don't feel this is not meant as a shot, but like nothing Thomas Jane is doing is like blowing me away. Like I think he's very effective in the role, but like once the Punisher part of this movie begins, he's fairly static. Whereas John Travolta is kind of getting to ham it up. He's having some fun with it. He's getting to chew the scenery, and also kind of reminding you that John Travolta can be this like very like gnarly bad guy, which I mean, a lot of people I think kind of forget, especially now where he does an odd selection of projects. I'll put it nicely and put it that way.
Sure.
But this here was kind of like, I guess, right at like the point, like right before, I guess, the decline. But yeah, I just rewatching it back, I just really liked his performance. And like, I really like what Thomas Jane is doing, but I think Travolta gets a little bit more to sink his teeth into being the kind of calm villain that slowly becomes unhinged over the course of this movie.
He does. Man, I did not expect to talk about John Travolta so early in this episode, but yeah, he does. I mean, I would give a mini Mark Strong award to John Travolta's hairpiece. It's doing a lot of
it's doing a lot of work here.
You can absolutely see the line around his hairline. But anyway, he the first note to have on him, because in his very first scene, he just mercilessly kills someone, and he blames them for the death of his son, and it's extremely cold-blooded. I mean, he just shoots him point blank without a second thought and walks out of the room. And I was like, this is, I believe he's a mob boss. I mean, he would later play Gotti, right? He did I think it might have been like a straight to DVD, one of those performances you're talking about.
That was one of those Movie Pass movies that I got an ad to go see every day for a while.
He definitely has. He can do that presence of a mob boss, a bad guy who does, I shouldn't say deserves respect, but has other bad guys respect and is feared in that community. I think he fits that part well. For me, hashtag positivity podcast, of course. I love Face Off. We've talked about how we love that
of course
movie so much, and God, it's confused. Technically, he plays the good guy, but for most of that movie, his performance is of the bad guy, and it's so over the top and so crazy that I can't help but compare this performance to that, and it falls short. This movie is no Face Off. And so for me, it was like, he's doing a good job, but I feel like he's capable of more, was kind of my thought. But you're right about him changing over the course of the movie. And his final scene in this movie, his death scene, he is pathetic, right? That opening scene, he is intimidating and fearsome, and at the end he is screaming like only John Travolta can, and a wounded animal that we do not feel sorry for. And it is nice to see that. Nice, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's nice. Yeah, it's fun to see that decline. Cathartic. So he he's like a good heel in wrestling that doesn't mind doing the job. He doesn't mind being pathetic to make our hero look good. So
he knows when he's got to take the loss. So
wow. Well, look at that. John Travolta, Mark Strong Award winner. Add that to your long list of accolades.
It's the most he's gotten in a long. I got an Emmy a few years ago. That's not true.
For me, I don't think my pick is going to be surprising at all. I'm going with Thomas Jane as the Punisher. I think he is excellent in this role. I think, obviously, he only got the one movie. He did get a short film. We'll talk about it a little bit later. It's 10 minutes long. But essentially, this is his only outing as the Punisher. And I think he is excellent in the role. He looks the part. He gets the character. He's got this gravelly voice that never sounds hammy or too over the top. It's just right. This movie and the Punisher property in general has to walk such a fine line where it shouldn't be glorifying murder and death and violence, but the lead hero still has to be cool. It's tough. It's a tough line to walk.
It's not a fun balance.
But I think he's able to get it. He's got a few, I wouldn't quite call them quips whenever he kills someone, but they obviously are meant to get maybe a chuckle out of the audience. And he just fastball right across home plate. I think he nails it. I would think if this movie was more successful, if it got a franchise, it got sequels, he played the character a few more times, we would have a hard time accepting anyone else as the Punisher. I think he would reach that level like Robert Downey Jr. or Hugh Jackman, where he is synonymous with the character. And just because he only got to do it once, he never quite gets there. And it leaves room for someone like John Bernthal to come in and also do very well with the character. But I love Thomas Jane in general. I think is great. I love him in this movie. He's great. The dude gets jacked. He is
jacked in this movie.
You
They
know,
find a
Andrew,
lot of excuses for him not to have a shirt on.
this is the one. This is the one that's going to do it. We've sat here on this podcast so many times and talked about these actors just getting ripped to play these roles. And I said a few episodes ago, like months ago, if it happened 5 or 6 more times, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to do something about it, Andrew. I'm going to start. I'm going to hit the gym, hit the weights, start working out. I'm going to shape this dad bod into a superhero, into a vigilante body. Mark my words, hold me accountable, listeners. Tweet at me. Hey, you hitting the gym today? I'm gonna do it, Andrew.
All right. I'm gonna mark strong your words. See what I did there? See? Get it?
You gonna mark strong
your word, because it's mark your words, but it's mark strong because it's our show. Get it?
Andrew, that was
it's
good.
Funny,
after
damn it.
After you explained it to me, it was very funny. I do love Thomas Jane, though. Of course, yeah. He's also in Face Off. Speaking of Face Off, which I didn't realize until I was researching it, but then I did Google Images. I was like, who does he play? And he's unrecognizable with the hair that he has compared to him, like in this movie. But he's in prison with Nicolas Cage, and if you don't remember that scene, Google it real fast. That's our boy Thomas Jane. Also in Boogie Nights, Deep Blue Sea, which is a shark movie that I very much adore.
Oh yeah,
shark movie. That's like its own genre of film, right? It's pretty incredible, and like the bad ones are good and the good ones are good. It's an interesting little subset.
This film, interesting, putting Thomas Jane with somebody else famous for being in a shark movie. So we'll get to that in a bit.
That's right. Quick shout out to the Jaws Breakers podcast. They're all about watching these poorly received shark movies. They stream it with their audience and then make a podcast episode about it. I was on there recently. We watched Virus Shark. So if you want to go check that out, that is one of their October episodes of Jaws Breakers. Thomas Jane is also in The Sweetest Thing, which I watched this movie with friend of the show, my wife, and she says that's what she knows Thomas Jane from, The Sweetest Thing. So it was quite a far cry to watch him in this.
I remember him. He's one of the vegan police in Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah.
But I also remember there's that episode of Arrested Development he's randomly in where he's like method acting being a homeless person for a role he's doing. But Lindsay actually thinks he's homeless and has no idea he's Thomas Jane, which was like right around the time this would have come out. So just a very odd set of circumstances.
Very good. Of course, in The Mist, a movie I very much enjoy. I always watch the black and white version, but I dig that movie. Man, I'm just realizing I would not want to play Thomas Jane's son in a movie.
No, absolutely not. Bad things happen to his family. It's kind of like you just don't want to be Sean Bean in a movie. You don't want to be Thomas Jane's son in a movie.
All right. We also got Will Patton in this movie as Quentin Glass. He's sort of Howard Saint's right-hand man. I kind of similar to The Sweetest Thing with my wife watching Thomas Jane. I most know Will Patton from Remember the Titans. Because I'm at the right age where, like, in high school, that was the movie we always watched when the teacher felt like having a day off. I saw this movie so many times back in the day, and his character is burned into my brain there, where he is very much a good guy in that movie, which is very different than what he's doing here.
It is. That's actually what's kind of interesting, I think, about his role here is that, like, he's playing an odd space to occupy because he's got this like cold calculating sense to him because he basically carries out most of Howard Saint's dirty work on his behalf. The scene where he sends Quentin and his team to Puerto Rico to kill Frank's family. I just thought it was really funny. He showed up to that assassination hit in a suit. Thought that was an odd choice of attire for a summer killing, but yeah.
Should he be in like a tropical shirt?
Yeah, a little bit more
sandals?
tactical. Maybe prepare for the environment. Maybe not something so hot, something that breathes a little bit more. But yeah, Remember the Titans is like what I know him from. Like but he's still doing stuff now. I saw him in the Forever Purge a couple of months ago. He's in the new Halloween movies, so he's still all over the place, going out there and doing his thing. But yeah, it's interesting seeing him play a little bit more. I mean, just a bad guy. That's what he is. He's a bad guy in this movie.
I think he does a great job. And no disrespect to your Mark Strong Award winner, but I found him more intimidating in this movie. He definitely gets more screen time than John Travolta. And like I said, he does the dirty work. So like whenever he's torching a character for information, that's him we get to see on screen being that bad guy. His character gets an interesting wrinkle where it's revealed that he is a closeted homosexual, and Thomas Jane uses this information to essentially blackmail him because he doesn't want it to come out. And then that also doubles as proof that he didn't actually have an affair with
Right.
Howard Saint's wife, which is plays an important part in the end of this movie. I'll say kudos to this movie for being released in 2004, having a character like this, a bad guy and closeted homosexual, and it's not once played for laughs or the butt of a joke, which happened all the time back then. So they handled it well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like I said, and that's an interesting wrinkle. He gets a little bit more of a, like you said, you get a bit more layers to the character than you might have realized. Obviously, that becomes a big part of Frank's overarching plan against the Saint family. But yeah, I think he's actually I wouldn't disagree that he's more intimidating, more intimidating. The scene where he basically tortures one of Frank's building
his friends, his new friends,
tenants, friends. That scene there where he's like, at the end of it, he's just like, well, I guess he didn't know anything, because if he did, he would have said no remorse at what he's done, just kind of matter of factly, well, I guess he doesn't know anything, and then just leaves. It's like no remorse, no questions, no anything. It's pretty dark.
Rebecca Romaine plays Joan, who lives in the building that Frank Castle moves into after his family is killed. He's his new neighbor. Rebecca Romaine, no stranger to the comic book world. She, of course, plays Mystique in the original X-Men movies. She's actually Rebecca Romaine Stamos at the time of this movie, thanks to a friend of the show, my wife, for reminding me of that. Also, in the world of comic book, she voices Lois Lane in a couple of DC animated movies.
Yes, she does.
I think she's great in this movie. I think she gets more to do than she had in the X-Men movies up to that time, because that first movie, they really don't let her do too much. She gets a few key scenes in the second. But here, you're not looking at she used to be a model, now she's trying to acting. She's just a really good actress. I think she does a great job.
She does. Like I said, she gets there's kind of the roommates that, not really roommates, but his friends that Frank makes kind of against his will. This is something that's a little bit excised from the Punisher comic by Garth Ennis, Welcome Back, Frank, which was a Punisher series, I think, in 2000. But that's this scenario of like unwittingly making these three friends kind of against my will. It's taken from that, where he kind of ends up with these people that he ends up looking after to a degree. So they get a recurring subplot where they build that kind of relationship that they have with Frank, even if Frank doesn't necessarily reciprocate it a lot, where he bails them out of several problems. So you get a bit of an insight into her character. She's been moving around a lot. She ends up with these abusive boyfriends. She's trying to get herself right on track, but she's struggling. And she ends up offering Frank a little bit of advice that ends up coming back to help him as he reaches what he thinks might be his end. So yeah, she, like I said, there's no question about it here. She's actually putting in a pretty good performance. And
speaking of avoiding some tropes, there's no romantic subplot between the two of them. There's no big kiss at the end, which would have been easy to slide in there and induce some eye rolls, but they avoid that completely. I really appreciated that.
They definitely seem like the other building mates are kind of trying to hint at it or push towards it, but Frank definitely doesn't go for it. And then, like you said, they ultimately just avoid doing that, which I think is, it's a good move. It's not Frank's style.
Ben Foster plays Dave, another tenant in the building who has a face full of metal, as Joan likes to say. Also works with Rebecca Romaine in X-Men 3, where he plays Angel.
A future X-Men cast member.
Yeah. And he's also in the 3:10 to Yuma from 2007, which a movie I very much enjoy. Think he does a great job here. I like his first scene where he is you see him like gaming. He's like a bunch of monitors in front of him, and he has like this wheelchair that he moves like with a joystick. And at the end of the scene, he jumps out of the chair in excitement because first time watching the movie, you assume like he's paralyzed or whatever, but he's just goofing around in this machine, in this chair.
No, he's a fantastic actor. Hell or High Water. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
Mm-mm.
It's him and Chris Pine and Jeff Bridges. Unbelievable, fantastic. a tremendous movie. But he's great in pretty much everything I've seen him in. I've enjoyed him. Obviously, Flash Forward for those of us that remember that from way back in the Nickelodeon days. But yeah, he gets some interesting. Like obviously, you get the scene where he gets essentially tortured by Quentin, and he doesn't break
Very good.
even toward the end, and it's really good stuff. Obviously, Ben Foster is just really good at playing that kind of very meek, kind of helpless type of character, which this guy definitely is built up as. We learn later his mom is just getting out of prison, which is, he's thankful for because why wouldn't he be? So just another of the kind of downtrodden of the building mates that Frank has. But yeah, he does a great job here. Not as much as Rebecca Romaine to work with here, but the stuff he has is really good.
Yeah. Rounding out those friends from the apartment building, we have John Pinette playing Bumbo. Now, sadly, he has passed away, age 50 in 2014. R.I.P. John Pinette. He's known for his stand-up and tons of bit parts across different movies and TV shows. This is actually one of his bigger roles, but odds are, even if you haven't seen this movie, you would recognize the gentleman. And he great job. There's no bad performances in this movie. I'll say that up front. But he sort of, his name is Bumbo.
Yes.
He's a bigger guy, and again, kudos to this movie for avoiding a bunch of easy laughs in that regard. And he's just a sweet, caring friend and a welcome presence on the screen.
Yeah, he's definitely meant to kind of. He takes care of Dave. That's like him and Dave have a very. They seem to be like best friends. They watch out for each other. They do their best. There's definitely a bond between the three of them without Frank. And then they try to bring Frank in because they see him as being very similar to themselves. But you buy that there's this long friendship between them, like that they care about each other, that they are invested, and that they want to take care of each other. Something I thought was interesting, this is apart from The Punisher, is that John Pinette, one of the things he did was in Hairspray, he played Edna Turnblad, which is one of the character's mother. I don't know if you guys remember this, but that is a role John Travolta also played in the film they made of Hairspray, which I just thought was a fun little piece of information.
So wait, what's the character's name?
Edna Turnblad.
Edna Turnblad. So The Punisher, the R-rated movie, The Punisher, has two actors that played Edna from Hairspray.
Turnblad.
That's incredible.
Yes. That is pretty amazing.
I think that rounds out the main cast. There's a few smaller castings I definitely want to shout out. First of all, Samantha Mathis plays Maria Castle, obviously, because the story of this movie, not in the movie a ton, but she does a good job. She's brutal. That her key scene where she's on the run with their son trying to stay alive is intense as hell, and she does a good job. Also, she played Princess Peach in the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yes. I was wondering if that was going to sneak by us or not. Also, one of I alluded to this earlier. One of the other Castle family members is Roy Scheider.
Love this casting, by the way.
Yeah, a great choice. Truly, honestly, even though he's legit in the movie, maybe 5 minutes, and that's kind of pushing it. But he plays Frank Castle Sr. So this movie was just all about bringing people from disparate filmographies or future filmographies together. But yeah, I think this is a great casting. We got a little bit of a hint into their relationship. They're looking at his father's guns that he's modified and ends up using later in the film. But he ends up playing a part in helping Frank try to save his family from this mobsters. He does not succeed. And then obviously the nature of this story, Frank also does not succeed. But I think this is a great casting. I liked it a lot. And only if they were fighting sharks. If only they were going up against the shark, they'd have been ready to go.
For anybody that doesn't know, Roy Scheider, a legend in Hollywood. I mean, he's in Jaws, he's in The French Connection, which those two alone, done, right? But it worked throughout his entire life. Sadly passed away in 2008. So R.I.P. Roy Scheider. But
not too long after this, honestly.
Small part, but brings a lot to it. I like that he takes out a few bad guys. He does go out like a punk. He goes out swinging, trying to avenge his family. I really enjoyed him.
A few others I wanted to mention. Obviously, our boy Kevin Nash gets a brief role as the Russian, who just his only part in this movie is to have an extended fight with Frank Castle. Does not say anything. I don't believe.
Probably the I mentioned that what I hear about this movie is Thomas Jane is good as Punisher, but other than that, this is the most famous scene from this movie, especially since it got turned into a meme. The old internet days, it's a picture of the Russian who wears a red and white striped shirt and he's choking out Thomas Jane, and the meme says, "In Soviet Russia, Waldo finds you."
Yes. But yeah, I remember when he lost a hair versus hair match on Raw so that he could cut his
Against
hair for this
Chris
movie.
Jericho.
Yes, it was. Which he then did not get his head shaved, which is usually how it works, but ended up just looking like he does here, except it wasn't blonde. Or maybe it was blonde. I don't remember.
The loser has to be in the Punisher.
Yeah.
That's
And
the
then
stipulation should have been.
yeah. And then just one other is Laura Herring plays Livia Saint, Howard Saint's wife, but she's just from Mulholland Drive, which is a movie I like a lot. And obviously me being the David Lynch fan. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a stacked cast, but definitely some interesting casting choices.
Who's the guy from Ocean's 11? I didn't write down his name.
Oh, Eddie Jemison.
Eddie Jemison. I just wanted to say he's really good at being sweaty and nervous.
Yes, that is I too am also really good at that. But yes.
All right, Andrew, let's jump into the movie. In particular, the best scenes of the movie. And of course, we're going to start again at the high point, at the top, with our favorite scenes of the movie. Andrew, in your opinion, what is the best scene in The Punisher?
I just really like the climax. I think that final, when Frank basically infiltrates the building in like the final showdown with Howard after he's made Howard kill his wife and his best friend, you're just getting like pure action there. It's Frank's whole plan has come to pass. He's basically completely taken everything from Howard at this point, and he's just finishing off the job. And it's a lot of brutal action. You get Frank using a whole bunch of different weapons, gets some weird creative kills that he gets to do as well. And you're really, honestly, you're seeing the Punisher like unchecked. And that's something that at the time was very much something that people didn't think they were ever going to get to see, really. So I like it. Jane is fantastic with the intensity. Like I said, you get to see Howard Saint kind of realize the situation as he's created it. And like you said, just full on descent into sniveling. But all that was really like, it's very satisfying watching it too, because it's just all of it's coming to pass. And it's just, good stuff.
Yeah, I'm of the mind that I don't think there's really any comic book movie that, quote, needs to be rated R.
Right.
I think you can do everything you need to do in a PG-13 movie. That being said, there are certain characters and certain stories that I do think can benefit from that R rating. The Punisher is one of them. Violence and killing specifically is a huge part of this character and what he's all about. So I think they use the R rating well. This movie has a few choice words, but it's not out of control. They're not just saying it for the sake of saying them. There is small brief nudity, but not gratuitous sex scenes or anything like that. I think they use it in the right places. And this climax is definitely one of them. There's some pretty brutal kills. There's a knife through the jaw and you see it through their mouth. I mean, there's some pretty gnarly stuff. Yeah. I do like that climax a lot. I like that there's a few scenes in this movie where Thomas Jane as the Punisher gets his ass kicked. I guess I'll say
he is not an invincible character by any means.
Yeah, and I always appreciate that. Now it's not to the levels of something like John Wick or the Daredevil TV show, where I think that was really a hallmark of those shows and really took it to the next level. But it shows that he's not invincible, infallible, like you said. However, the climax of this movie, he gets stabbed and hit a few times, but he's in control the entire time. We're never fearing for his life. He's just tearing through this building full of mobsters like it's nothing, and it's the roller coaster hit the peak, and now we're just in free fall, enjoying the ride. Right? Whenever he finally comes face to face with Howard Saint, we've been building this moment for 2 hours. There's no fight. There's no conflict. Howard is literally running away from him after being shot, and he just walks up to him, says what he has to say, ties him to a car, sends him on his way to death. And Howard is just like we said, pathetic at that time.
Like you said, there's no fight, there's no face off, there's no like And I don't even know if to that point had Howard and Frank even met to that point. I don't think they had.
I think this is the first time you
Right.
see them on screen together. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's because I obviously Howard knows who he is because he's the guy that sends all of his guys to kill his family. But it's very much like it's not like a movie where finally at the end these two things meet and it's like this intense showdown. It's the complete opposite. Like the first time Howard sees Frank, he's crawling away, like begging for his life and like realizing that he's been completely had and like manipulated into killing his wife and his friend. And like now his other son is dead too. And it's like he's just sad. It's just sad to look at him. And Frank just,
Yeah.
at that point, it's almost a mercy killing when Frank just is like, all right, now I'm going to finish you off. And it's just a very satisfying thing to watch.
I made the comment a minute ago where the movie has to ride a line between not quite glorifying killing and violence, but it's tough. It's a tough situation to be in, and everybody's gonna have their own situation, their own opinion on whether or not it crosses that line or not. I will say the one time the movie does cross that line very much intentionally is this scene where he kills Howard, where he ties him in the back of the car and he sends the car like it's an idle and it's just, slowly going through this parking lot. And he's setting off explosives and just a bunch of cars around Howard being dragged are blowing up. Not blowing him up, but blowing cars up around him, which is kind of strange. It looks cool. There's a lot of explosions. And then we find out why when the camera pans up and in this parking lot in flaming cars is the Punisher logo.
A little over the top, I must say.
2 hours, the movie earned it.
Yeah.
That's my take anyway.
Yeah, sure. Nobody but Frank is going to see that. Like Frank's the only one who knows what it is.
It's the thing that you think, it's like The Dark Knight Rises. Batman basically does the same thing. He lights this bridge on fire for his logo. And if you take 2 seconds to think about it, like that time you spent setting this up probably could have been more productive. But you know what? You're watching the movie wrong. Just it's a cool logo. It looks awesome.
He's Batman.
Yeah, or he's
that's one instance where I think because he's Batman is an acceptable excuse.
Yeah.
And this is because he's the Punisher. Why not?
He's the Punisher. Yeah. I mean, you could try to say like, he's starting his mission as the Punisher and he's making sure his logo. No,
right.
I mean, you're trying too hard.
Like I said, no one's gonna see that.
it just looks cool. I allowed it. And that Punisher logo, by the way, one of the best logos in comic books of all time. I think
it looks pretty gnarly.
It's pretty great. I love it. It's been sort of bastardized and used for other purposes outside of comics, which I'm not a fan of most of those. But as far as comic book emblems and logos, and I mean, I love the Punisher's costume, if you will. It's just all black, just with that logo on his chest. Just I don't know. No denying that looks. They awesome.
Even give an origin to that shirt.
Yeah, that was interesting. So I'm assuming that's not from the comics. Is that an?
I don't think so.
Movie?
No.
His son gives him that shirt as a gift in Puerto Rico. I think he said he bought it locally. He
there was like a shirt vendor or something.
So hopefully he's paying that guy royalties.
Yeah, apparently. Hopefully that guy understands. But yeah, his son was saying that it's meant to ward off evil spirits or something of that nature. So he uses it as his symbol. But yeah, anyway, that climax, just pure unadulterated Punisher, cool stuff.
It's very good. It's not what I wrote down as my favorite scene, but I definitely very much enjoyed it. We are not seeing eye to eye on this episode, but you know what?
No, we are not.
That just means there's a lot of good stuff in this movie.
Sure.
I highlighted an earlier scene. So leading up to that climax, right? He finally goes against Howard Saint. Throughout most of this movie, Howard is just sending assassins after Thomas Jane. And there's some great scenes in this movie. Some of the best scenes in this movie are the Punisher just going one-on-one with a random assassin. And they each kind of have their own gimmick, their own character, if you will. So there's this scene in the middle of this movie where Frank Castle goes to a diner and he's just having breakfast by himself. And this man walks in, older gentleman with a guitar case. and he's eyeing him, and he's kind of staring him down as he sits down across the restaurant. And he goes to open that guitar case, and Frank Castle reaches for his gun because he assumes, there's a gun about to come out of this guitar case, but there's not. It's just a guitar. And this man plays like a Johnny Cash style, outlaw Western song. In the middle of this movie, he plays the whole thing and just asks me, "Do you like that song? I wrote that for you." And the man leaves. And it's so weird. it's you're thinking
Specifically,
probably,
he says he's going to play it at his funeral.
yeah, okay, yeah, it's a little bit more ominous. I mean, he's very much, he knows who Frank Castle is. There's obviously something going on there, but he just walks out of the restaurant, and we're probably wondering what Frank Castle is wondering, like, what the hell was that? Frank Castle leaves. He's driving his car. He's sitting at a red light, and he looks up in his rearview mirror, and his car is barreling towards him, and it crashes into him, and it's the man who we learn is named Harry Heck, because that's what's written on his guitar case. And he steps out of his car and he starts unloading on Frank Castle's car. So a car chase ensues. He's hunting Frank Castle down. And then it's almost a parody what happens here, because a ball bounces into the street and a little kid running after it in front of Frank Castle's car, and he has to swerve and gets in a car wreck. But I'll allow it. And then Harry Heck pulls up to the wreckage. Frank Castle's crawling out of his car, and he has him dead to rights, right? Frank Castle pulls out a knife, and Harry mocks him for bringing a knife to a gunfight. And then the blade shoots out of the handle, stabs Harry in the neck, and very viscerally kills this man. Yes. And it was so out of left field in a movie that is very straightforward. We have Thomas Jane, the vigilante, versus Howard Saint, who's like the quintessential mob boss, and these characters, these tropes we very much understand. So then you get Harry Heck, who's like a Bond villain. He's got his own little backstory that's just all introduced in this one scene, and then he's dead, and then it's over. And they do the same thing with Kevin Nash's character, the Russian. You get this random assassin with his own backstory in this one scene. Both those scenes are great. I went with this one because it's a little bit weirder, and it was
very weird.
So unexpected, but I liked the character of Harry Heck. I liked his little song. I like that scene a lot.
And that Harry Heck is played by Mark Colley, who is like a country music musician who's had like charting singles. So like it's even more so very strange, because like and that scene is actually, like you said, it's really great because you're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, they said earlier, we got a professional coming in from Memphis. That's like the lingo they use. There's like, we've got a professional coming in from Memphis. And then later Travolta is just like, send the Russian, like that. Like that's an even bigger deal. But so it's a whole scene where you're building to this tension of like, where is this going? What is it building to? And then he gets up and leaves. And you're kind of like you said, you kind of sit back and you're like, what is that? Like, obviously you think more is coming, but it's just a really well-built scene. Like you said, it's very weird. It's even the Russian scene is not super out of place with the rest of this movie, outside maybe the shirt he's wearing. But overall, that scene is definitely a standout because it's effective at what it's trying to do, but it also is super weird.
I'm reminded a lot of John Wick watching this movie, and it's not on that level. Like, this movie isn't that stylized action movie that the John Wick movies are, but there's still a lot of parallels, like one man out for vengeance going against an entire line of assassins, many of them with their own little gimmicks like we're talking about. At one point, Frank Castle says the Latin phrase, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war, which of course is used in John Wick and is actually the title of the third movie, Parabellum. So again, not to that level, but you could say very much in that vein.
Very much so. I think we're also drawing a lot of inspiration from stuff like maybe Death Wish or stuff like Dirty Harry. I think this movie definitely feels more like a Dirty Harry or a Death Wish in its approach. Obviously, like you said, John Wick is very stylized, but we're also in John Wick. We're in a very
not a grounded world.
It's not a grounded world. It's a very rich world, like literally from a money perspective. This is a very rich world for John Wick. With this, it feels more nitty gritty, like a Death Wish or a Dirty Harry or something like that. So, and I think Hansley even said that Dirty Harry was one of the things they looked at when they were building inspiration for this. So it definitely shows. But yeah.
Over in that Discord, which you can join if you haven't already by checking out the link in the description, we got a message about this movie from Phil from Missouri. And they said they wanted to give some attention to the overall Western vibe the movie has, with a quick draw as the finale. I also loved the playfulness of the fight with the Russian, some genuinely funny reaction shots in neighbors' perspectives in that scene. Excellent point, Phil. I had not thought about the Western overtones of this movie until I read that, but I think he's right. There's like a old school shootout at the end of this movie when he takes down
There is
old Johnny T there.
Yeah, it's you definitely, in the way that he kind of interacts with other people, you definitely get kind of a lone cowboy kind of vibe.
Yeah,
where he's kind of keeping to himself and he's dedicated on his mission. There's definitely a plot here that easily could have or probably was the plot of a Western.
Yeah, and the Russian fight. I mean, everybody that talks about this movie, if like brings that up, it's, dare I say, iconic, and it is fun. And in an odd way, it brings a bit of levity to the movie.
Yeah, just because like the no sells by Kevin Nash there sometimes all timed well comedically. And just it's odd that such a brutal, devastating fight could be a source of levity, but it is.
Thanks for writing in, Phil.
Thank you.
I really like the very, very opening of this movie, the opening credits. It's like animated. You got the Marvel logo, and then it turns black and white, and then it gets shot up. I was wondering if they were going to go full Marvel Knights, but I guess we only ever saw that with the Ghost Rider movie. But this is also a Marvel Knights property. Comes 1 year after Daredevil. At any rate, that opening animated sequence, I'm always a sucker for those super stylized animated sequences. I wish it would last a little bit longer, but it's very cool. You got a few bullet casings falling down, and then finally the Punisher logo, and it bleeds into the opening of this movie, where Thomas Jane is undercover as Guy Pearce.
Basically.
When he walked in, he's got this blonde hair, and I'm like, he looks, I know you don't like it when I compare actors to other actors, so you never think I'm right, but in that disguise, Andrew, he kind of looks like Guy Pearce. Give me that one.
I can understand you saying he looks like Guy Pearce. I would not agree with you saying you would mistake him for Guy Pearce.
No, of course, I'm watching The Punisher. I know it's Thomas Jane. Actually, I guess he kind of looks like his character in Face Off. He's got the long, blonde hair. Good little opening action set piece. The movie, for as simple as it is in some ways, it's a revenge flick. He's trying to kill the man that killed his family. That's basically it. There's a lot of intricacies in there. There's a lot of characters with complex backstories. And the way Frank Castle goes about getting revenge isn't just shooting everyone in the head, especially with Howard Saint, who manipulates his friends into making him believe that his best friend is having an affair with his wife and makes him be the one to kill both of them. And we don't need to walk you through the ins and outs of how he does that, but there's a lot of scenes dedicated to him setting things up and going through the paces to make this a reality that the movie didn't have to do. This movie could have been a 90-minute all action straightforward revenge flick. It makes it more complicated, but I think it succeeds. I appreciate everything that it goes through and all the extra twists and turns they add.
Yeah, I very much appreciate his fire hydrant in a bag that he uses multiple times.
Yeah, that was good.
It was, well, and it's one of those things when he first did it as I'm watching it, because the setup is that he goes to Howard Saint's wife's car and he sets up this fire extinguisher outside of it, and then he does this fire hydrant. Sorry, not extinguisher. Extinguishers aren't on the street. Andrew, what are you talking about?
Ridiculous.
But so he literally brings up this heavy bag, pulls out this fire hydrant, and then he like takes her car somewhere else to get it a parking ticket. But I was like, why the fire hydrant? So nobody took the spot. I was like, oh, that's it. I get it.
What's funny, Andrew? I'm looking at my notes, and I was reviewing them before we started recording. And one of my notes, I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I don't remember what I was talking about. And what I wrote was fire extinguisher bit was very clever. And I couldn't figure out it's because I meant fire hydrant. So I made the same mistake in my notes.
That's all good. But yeah. But no, that whole plot he makes to basically unravel Howard Saint's life it's very involved, but I think it's effective because it shows that it's one thing to just go in and shoot them all up, but it's another thing to take everything from him. Because not just is that the culmination of his plan, his first part of his plan is to like burn his relationship with these with these drug smugglers that he's basically been working with for like a decade. He makes sure to lose a bunch of their money twice. So they stop trusting Howard and basically taking away one of Howard's biggest points of income.
Hit him where it hurts.
Exactly. Oh, speaking a little bit more to the first scene, I like that this is kind of a very stripped down version of Frank's origin. This is something that takes a little bit of liberties from the comics. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think they get across what kind of work Frank does and the extent as to which he's had to do it effectively by just giving us this kind of one scene at the beginning and then just a little bit more dialogue with his family later. Because I think it was even Hensley that said that if they tried to take all the Punisher backstory stuff, it would have been, an even longer film. And like you said, talking about the things that already got cut, this movie's already 2 hours. Yeah. And you start talking about cut footage, you're looking at a movie that's 2.5, 3 hours. And that's just kind of ridiculous for a Punisher movie. So I think the way they streamline this is very effective. It gets the point across, the kind of work he does, and more easily how that can build some bad relationships.
One thing they don't skip over is the scene where his family dies, which I have seen this movie before, but I did not remember how long this scene is. And I also didn't remember that he's at a family reunion. Of course, classic Punisher, his wife and son are going to die. That's the big thing with him. But in this movie, and I don't know if it's from the comics or not, but he's at a family reunion. They literally kill his entire family. A huge gathering, 50 plus people there. And they just walk up on the beach. It happens like in broad daylight, which to me makes things like this scarier. Right. You'd expect them like sneak in at night and a little bit more stylized in that way. But like in broad daylight, people are getting shot and killed and massacred. And his wife and son try to escape. They're on the run. They literally get hunted down and ran over. And he walks up to them and grieves over their bodies. I mean, it is dark. This movie, it's the entire movie isn't like depressingly dark, but this scene goes for it, and it's kind of hard to recover from. It takes a minute before you can have a funny line make you chuckle or whatever, because it makes you like sit in this moment. Other than that, and I think that's fine. By the way, I mean that's the Punisher story. They didn't have to go that hard on it, I think, but it explains how our character becomes as broken as he is. So I get why it's all in the movie. All that being said, from a more technical standpoint, during a lot of scenes in this movie, really, this movie feels like a 90s action movie, which makes sense considering our writer and director's pedigree. But like we said, there's very little CG. Most of it's practical. There's a scene during this family massacre where a propane tank is shot and this man explodes and flies through the air on fire, and it's very clearly like a guy like in a fire suit with a wig on flying through the air, which isn't a knock at the movie. I love practical effects like that. I'm not exactly cheering when it happens in this scene here, but the filmmaking principles that they use, it seems very much, if we can do it practical, we will. You got squibs, you got, like I said, fire suit, a lot of practical stuff, and it's a style of action movies that you honestly don't see anymore.
No, not really. And that was actually, like you said, it was something that I noticed watching it. It very much does have that feel, just even with the kind of very dryly delivered comebacks, like some of the stuff he does with things like that. I can definitely get that vibe. Like if you told me this movie was written by the guy who wrote Die Hard 3, I would be like, yeah, that tracks. Yeah. That doesn't shock me. But yeah, the practical stuff you said, you can tell, but like I said, I really think it's effective for this movie to do that, because I think if you had gone with a bunch of CG, especially in 2004, it would end up dating this movie.
Oh yeah.
And as it is now, it's not really a whole lot in it that looks super dated.
It definitely, in that regards, has aged much better than Daredevil.
Yes, absolutely.
Whenever Frank first gets back to the city, one of the first acts of violence that he does really isn't all that violent. I love the scene for a lot of reasons. The scene I'm talking about is he finds one of Howard Stark's lackeys, one of the low men on the totem pole, takes him back to his place, and he strings him up by his feet. And he puts on these welder goggles, and he lights the torch and is explaining that it burns at over 2,000 degrees. and that whenever it burns your flesh, it singes your nerve endings and actually feels like it's freezing. Isn't science fun, Mickey? That's what he tells him.
Yeah.
And so he goes behind him and he uses the torch on a raw steak in a pan to make the searing sound and smell. But then he pokes his back with a popsicle. That's, of course, really cold. And the man's freaking out because he assumes his back is getting burned. And I love this scene because, one, that's all very clever. And two, it shows that Frank Castle isn't now like a murdering psychopath that is blood hungry. He is very much about the mission. He's, of course, okay with crossing the line, okay with killing people and going too far. It's who he is, but he is not out of control, and he doesn't necessarily revel or like the bloodshed. So I think it says a lot about the character, and is just a super clever scene.
Yeah, that's one of the scenes that I vividly remember watching, just because of how clever it is. How, you know, he goes through all these steps to basically get this character Mickey, who was one of the people from the original bust that knows the Saint family, kind of under his employ versus Howard's, or basically help him take down Howard. And it's well done, but like at the end where he finally like finishes and he lets Mickey stand up and he's like, "You are not a nice man." Because once he finally understands what happened. But yeah, fun scene. Not fun, but yeah.
He announces his return to the people of the city by going to his own grave, because he has a headstone because he was presumed dead. He pulls it out of the ground and he leaves it on the golfing green where Howard Saint likes to play golf. And that's how he lets him know, like, I'm back, I'm coming for you. And of course, he starts picking off his men, which that visual of Frank Castle's headstone by the on the putting green, pretty damn cool. Pretty cool. One of the first ways that he gets back at Howard Saint is by going to his, I guess, bank, like his mob bank where all his cash is held. Yeah. And he holds the people at gunpoint, gets all the cash, and makes them throw it out the window. And of course, he doesn't care about money and using it for himself. He just wants to hurt Howard. So he throws it out the window, and there's like, accidents happening in the street because everybody's pulling their car over and trying to get all the money. Yeah.
He does take some money for himself, but he has that briefcase.
He does it for his
finder's fee. Finder's fee. No, he does also go to the police station. I kind of like this scene too, where they're like, "Oh God, Castle, you're alive," and he has this speech where he's kind of like talking about how nobody's been brought to justice for the death of his family. And they're basically like, these things take time. You have to be patient. We know you're upset. That's what it ends with. We know you're upset.
Which was a sort of, I don't know if it was intended or not, but it definitely got a laugh out of me because he says, yeah, it's been 5 months since my family was killed and I don't see one person in jail. And the police chief says, obviously you're upset. Dude, read the room.
But basically, so he goes like, no, I was upset, when the Yankees win the World Series. I'm upset when I get a flat tire. So if that's what upset is, I have no idea what this is. And if you have a word for that, let me know, because I don't. But very, again, it's not that Frank Castle is like, they're not like claiming he's still dead or anything. Like, people know he's alive. And I thought that was a cool little wrinkle, because it'd be easy to just be like, oh, nobody knows he's alive. But that's not what he wants. He wants Howard Saint to know, I'm coming for you. He wants him to know that he's the one doing all of this. And that's part of what leads Saint down this weird rabbit hole that he doesn't end up coming back from.
I think the only thing worse the police chief could have said was like, all right, calm down.
Calm down.
All right, let's jump into that Russian fight. We've talked about it a little bit, but it is definitely a highlight of the movie. For one, you've got Kevin Nash with short, bleach blonde hair, which in 2004 was quite jarring because he was, not known for that look, we should say.
No, definitely not.
Also, he's wearing this red and white striped shirt, which stands out in this movie. And I didn't know the first time I watched the movie, but the Russian is a character from the comics who does wear that shirt. So this is very much like drawing from that. But if you don't know that, or even if you do, it just looks so strange. And he just shows up at Frank Castle's apartment. And aside from that shirt being jarring, the other thing that's a bit jarring is that in the apartment his three friends are together. I think they're cooking at the time, and they've got a record playing like some like opera music.
Yeah.
And so that becomes the music for this gory graphic fight scene where they're stabbing each other and beating the crap out of each other. You've got this opera music playing that doesn't quite line up, and I don't know if it's quite played for laughs, but it definitely adds a little bit of levity to a pretty dark scene.
Yeah, the idea there is that, like, you know, while Frank is getting stomped around by this Russian guy, his roommates are completely unaware of what's happening. That's kind of the joke. But that is from it's an opera. I don't remember what it's from.
I
Rigoletto,
recognize
maybe.
it. It's been used on a lot of movies.
Yeah, it's used in commercials. It's used in all sorts of places. But pretty much, like, if somebody asked, like, everybody will recognize this as, like, if you need a song to sound operatic or like an Italian restaurant or something, they're going to use this. They're going to use this music. But yeah, it's a very involved fight too. Very brutal. Like, Frank keeps trying to take him down and he's not succeeding. Like, really, he survives almost in spite of himself rather than because of himself. But it's a brutal fight for all said and done.
Andrew, how would you describe the stature of Kevin Nash? How's he built?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say he's a brick shit house, but
he's
pretty
not
close.
He's not that far.
He's not wide enough to be the shit house.
He's the crap house.
Yes, he's 7 foot 320. I mean, he's certainly I mean, we've all seen Super Shredder. That's Kevin Nash. We get it. Oh, he's up there.
Another parallel to John Wick. He's in John Wick, also with short hair.
Oddly enough.
Now, the Punisher in this movie very much has, oh man, I don't know if I call it morals, but some sort of code. You know, he's not just off the hook. A lot of people, for shorthand, will describe the Punisher as Batman without rules, or who's not willing to go too far. And I wouldn't quite agree with that. If we want to get to the nuances, he just has a different set of rules and a different, obviously a very different code that he goes by. He'll use guns, he'll kill.
Mm-hmm.
But he describes what he does as not vengeance, but punishment.
Right.
Vengeance is an emotional response. I'll get you back for this. Punishment is objectively, you deserve this. I just happen to be the one doling it out. And that short film that he made, Dirty Laundry, in 2012, where he reprises the role, they do something very similar with the difference between punishment and justice. And I won't spoil it for you. That's kind of the whole point of that short. But if you want to watch it, it's 10 minutes. It's on YouTube. It's pretty good. A bit jarring because the score is lifted from The Dark Knight, which that music is synonymous with that movie. So you're thinking of The Dark Knight while this is happening. But I wish they would have made original music for that. But overall, I would recommend it. Dirty Laundry.
Rob Perlman showing up in that too.
Yeah. But yeah, he kind of lays it all out during the climax of this movie. He writes, he leaves behind this note, which is pretty much implying that he wants people to know the reason behind everything he's doing. And his plan is, if he doesn't die carrying this out, he's going to kill himself afterwards. Like, this is the end. After this, his mission will be done. And with literally a gun in his mouth, he remembers his wife and decides not to kill himself. And he thanks Joan for helping him find, a piece of humanity, something to live for, which is to be the vigilante, the Punisher. And he tells her, I've got a job to do. Read the newspaper every day and you'll understand. And when she asks which section, he says obituaries.
See, stuff like that.
So
very
cool.
90s.
Very 90s. Very comic book, but it works. There's a few lines like that kind of get a laugh, that kind of like, his motivation is never to like seem cool or seem funny. That's not the Punisher, and this movie never quite gets to that level, which I appreciate. But like, for example, after he kills the Russian, which is pretty brutal, he throws like hot grease,
boiling
into his
pot
face.
of grease on his face.
It looks pretty gross. But they ask him how he is after the fight. He says, "I'm fine." He's not.
And then he falls over.
Yeah, which is kind of like a funny quip, but kind of just matter of fact. It's just him kind of just saying it how it is. So it rides the line very well.
Yes, it's got, like you said, he's got a couple of those quips, but they're delivered very flatly, so it doesn't. you can tell he's not saying it to be cool or funny or anything. It's just kind of, I don't know, it's what he feels like saying at the time, but it all mostly works.
Andrew, how would you surmise this movie functions as an adaptation of The Punisher?
We're clearly pulling from a lot of things. This is pulling specifically from like Punisher Year One and Welcome Back Frank. There's a lot of Welcome Back Frank that it pulls from, but in Welcome Back Frank, it's the Nucci family, the Ganucci family. I already say it. They're the ones that end up killing us because one of the big departures is Howard Saint is not a comic book character. Quentin Glass is not a comic book character. None of these people they're not just not usually tied to Frank's origin. They're not from anything. They're just straight up creations for this movie. They're kind of just taking kind of some various different versions and just kind of combining them into identifiable mob boss, identifiable mob operating circle. That being said, we're obviously getting a lot of parallels. Obviously, Frank's family dying is the precipice for him becoming the Punisher, and the first people he punishes, quote unquote, are the people that killed his family. I think he has 2 kids in the comics, though. But so in the comics, it's more of his family witnesses like a mob hit in like Central Park. So his whole family gets killed, but he survives, and then he goes after them. In this one, we're obviously streamlining some of that. We're changing, we're making Howard Saint the figurehead of this. But in this case, we've obviously switched that origin up, but the goal is the same. The nature of why his family is killed is different, but the result is his family is dead and he's got a vendetta against a very specific family first and foremost. So I think it's being made from a place of respect. As far as why we're changing these things up, I couldn't tell you. But I think we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. But like you said, it's kind of like with Robbins or whatever else. You're taking a bunch of different things, you're putting them all together. There was even more stuff from the comics that was supposed to be in this. There was talk of Microchip being in it, who's kind of a weird armorer for the Punisher. Jigsaw, who's kind of one of his other classic villains. Those two would eventually end up appearing in the later film they make after this, Punisher Warzone. But overall, I think they're pulling a lot from that Garth Ennis pretty seminal run on the Punisher, where they kind of took the Punisher out of the Marvel universe and kind of put him in his own place. Punisher, there's a bunch of different versions, but Punisher Max is kind of what it's typically known as. And this is pulling from a lot of that. I think it's being done respectfully. Obviously, we're not page to page or page to screen here, but overall, I think you're looking at a group that was trying to honestly make a Punisher movie. Jane, I think, was particularly enthusiastic about doing that. Overall, I think we're coming from the right place.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know a lot of the specifics as far as the stories they're pulling from, but I know the character of Punisher pretty well. I'm a pretty big fan. I've read a bit, and he's very much recognizable as the Punisher of this movie. In this movie, it's not like the, what is this, Artisan Lionsgate. It's not the movie version of the Punisher. It feels like the Punisher. Like, this is, what you expect. Some names of villains might have been changed, but it's who he is. I think, just kind of judging by some comments made by Jonathan Hansley, that characters like Jigsaw, who were in the script at one point, were taken out because it's just a little bit fantastical. This movie is over the top, but it's not goofy or silly ever. I mean, the Russian's about the silliest thing. That's only silly because it's Kevin Nash with blonde hair and a red and white shirt. But a character like Jigsaw, who visually looks pretty distinct, or Microchip, would maybe stick out a bit in the revenge story they're telling. And it almost feels like you could say this movie is just a typical Hollywood revenge story, but he happens to be called the Punisher. And that's kind of true, but given how many things they are true to in the Punisher and the stories and characters they're pulling from, I think it rises above. It never reaches that territory where it's ashamed of being a comic book movie. I think it embraces it very much. The logo is front and center, which is very important. It's good. It's good. I honestly don't quite understand the 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. Not that this is by all a perfect movie or anything, but I can understand something closer to 50s or 60s where it's a bit split. Maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but I think it's deserves better than it was reviewed. I'll say that.
I agree. I was like I said, when I saw that score, I was kind of surprised. And then the audience score is still only like 63%. So um, I don't know. Watch it again, everyone.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us for the Punisher talk, or at least the Punisher 2004. If you're a fan of the other Punisher movie, the Punisher Warzone, we want to know about it. Shoot us an email, bestoftherestpod@gmail.com, and let us know why you like the movie. What are your favorite scenes? Who gives the best performance? Who's the Mark Strong Award winner? Whenever we cover that movie, we're going to read your thoughts on the episode. So send them our way. Now, there's something that I normally request our listeners to do about this point of the episode, and I've been requesting it every single episode just about, and I think everyone who's going to listen to my voice has done it already. So, Andrew, why don't you give it a shot? Why don't you tell people listening to our voices right now what they can do to help out our show?
You could leave us a review, folks. There is nothing that's going to help us more than getting more reviews on the show. Helps the algorithm, obviously helps keep our show growing. But while you're at it, don't just leave a review for our show. Leave a review for all the shows you listen to. And like we said before, if you leave one of those reviews, it will get read on the show. We appreciate you all taking the time. This show has been a lot of fun for us to make, and it is a delight to see people enjoying it so much. So we'd like to share those reviews with everybody when we can. So yes, don't just leave us a review, leave everyone a review. It is greatly appreciated, and it only helps the show more. Like this review from Obnox Poser. Come for the insight, stay for the dad jokes. Oh, dear God. A refreshing
Dad jokes.
and
Who makes dad jokes on this show?
this show. I have no idea. Anyway, come for the insight, stay for the dad jokes. A refreshing and humorous look back on some quote unquote hidden treasures. And they truly live by their call to bring us a hashtag PP, which makes for a positive and entertaining hour of discussion. Thanks, Obnox Poser. It's been a lot of fun. Hashtag PP.
Hashtag PP, which of course stands for hashtag positivity podcast. That's what we're all about, bringing you the best of the less than stellar superhero movies out there. So thank you so much for that review, Obnox Poser. Certainly appreciate it. Huge thanks for making Andrew finally say hashtag PP.
How dare you? I can't believe you've done this.
And remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thank you to Mitch of Depressed to Impress for the music. Check him out on YouTube and twitch.tv. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. We appreciate it, and it's the only way we're going to grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. FBI agent Frank Castle retires from active duty and looks forward to spending more time with his wife and daughter. Why did I write daughter? Okay. Change that. FBI agent Frank Castle retires from active. I can't laugh during this.
No, you can't.
It's not a good one to laugh through. If you're a fan of the other Punisher movie, the Punisher Warzone, which came out in 2013, we want to know about it. Shoot us an email, bestoftherestpod@gmail.com, and let us know why you like the movie. What are your favorite scenes? Who gives the best performance? Who's the Mark Strong Award winner? Whenever we cover that movie, which we inevitably will, we're going to read
Chris,
your
you
messages.
need to stop. Punisher Warzone came out in 2008.
God bless. I'll just cut out what year it came out.